Well, thank you so much for joining me here at Consensus. I want to start by talking about Bitcoin ETFs, and I want to talk about WisdomTree's BTCW. That ETF launched with the, I'll call them avalanche of other funds that launched back in January. Has about $85 million under management right now. Just talk to me about how you feel about adoption of that fund and where you see it right now.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting thing in ETF history that you'd kind of hit a starting gun and have, something like 11 ETF issuers launch on the same day. The product's working exactly like we expected to, which is great. We were really targeting the wealth management channel, who's just now really onboarding some of these products. So conversations have been going really well there. Happy the product works like we expected it to. We've had a lot of success with our European kind of versions of these products, which have been out much longer. And they've actually gotten a lot of flows year to date, seeing more and more adoption from investors over there. So that's been great so far.
You mentioned some of the conversations you're having with people about adoption. I'm wondering if you're feeling any sort of urge to seem more competitive or show your competitive advantage. One of the ways that a lot of funds did that was talking about fees, lowering fees. You have, it's 0.25%, right? But it's waived at 0% for the first certain amount that people invest. What ways are you thinking about being competitive now or sort of showing how important WisdomTree's Bitcoin ETF is?
No comment in terms of like where fees could go from here. Obviously, fees kind of started at like a higher price point. You saw some of the firms that first launched, then they came down, which is, tough for sponsors like us, but great for consumers. So I think that's been a great consumer development, good for crypto overall. Fees, we'll kind of see where those might go from here. I think some of the lowest priced products are at 19 basis points right now, kind of comfortable with that fee range that we're at. No changes kind of coming there.
I also want to talk about Ether ETFs.
Yep.
We got that rule change from the SEC last week, which sort of paved the way for Ethereum ETFs. You have a proposal in front of the SEC, and I just want to know if there's anything you can say about where that is in the process and how soon we might see some of those start trading.
Yeah, it seemed like things were changing pretty quickly on the ETH ETF front. We've had a prospectus filing in for quite a while now. There's not too much I can say about that process. It needs to go through like a 19before process from here. I mean, WisdomTree's overall product strategy in ETFs is trying to be first or different. With these crypto ETFs, it's been an interesting thing where there's been a lot of them just going at the same time. So, we're kind of evaluating our strategy here, seeing how the situation is going to play out going forward.
A lot of the funds that are proposing these ETFs remove staking from their prospectuses in the hopes of maybe appeasing the SEC or making them more willing to approve them. Did you remove staking from your proposal?
No, it's not. I don't think it was ever factored in.
It was never in there. How do you feel about these funds having to remove staking? Do you think that removes some of the incentive to invest in them, or is it Ethereum in itself enough to get somebody to get into these ETFs?
Well, I think it's interesting with the ETFs. Obviously with staking, you need to get kind of a pooled set of capital, a sufficient size, be able to manage the liquidity redemptions across them. So, potentially you could see ETFs being able to do that, but it does raise questions in terms of actually being able to meet liquidity, how that gets managed. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of comes out going forward. I guess I'm not surprised that that's where things are at right now in terms of these ETFs, but we'll obviously see where staking goes from here. But you definitely see the demand for people getting their staking rewards on that. And from an issuer perspective, you can see how it makes sense to make it as competitive as possible, and also in terms of economics.
Last question on the ETF front. We saw BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF surpass GBTC, and I sort of took that as a sign that, even if you might be the biggest in this space right now, it doesn't mean it will necessarily stay that way. And in the context of the Ethereum ETFs, we have Grayscale's Ethereum Trust at around 10 billion under management. Are you thinking about ways to make yourself the most competitive, to maybe take the lead there and be the biggest if and when you do get approved?
Well, without answering kind of the specifics, you can just kind of go back and look at ETF history, where there's been funds that were launched first, they had higher price points, more on-screen liquidity around them. And over time, lower price funds kind of can eat into that share, and it really depends, and people have found ways to make themselves as competitive as possible. So this was an odd duck where you had a product that wasn't an ETF, that was out there, that had shareholders in it for different reasons, but the pricing difference was pretty extreme. So I think maybe it happened faster than a lot of people were expecting. It'll be interesting to see kind of how they want to play things with the Ether ETF as well. But really with these types of products, you're really trying to differentiate around fees, your distribution, you can say a little bit of brand. But a lot of them, are tracking the underlying price of Bitcoin and Ether as exactly as you'd expect, which is what you want as a consumer. So without kind of some additional functionality around them, they're all pretty similar, if we're being honest.
I'm going to take this conversation all the way back to a year ago. It was May 2023, and you were at a conference with my colleague Tanea McKeel talking about tokenization. and I believe you pointed to mutual funds as sort of the first place where we might see tokenization. It's an easy entry point. Year later, 2024, where do you feel the sentiment is on tokenization right now? You feel like we've made real progress in towards mainstream adoption of that? Where are we?
Yeah, I mean, it's still early days, but first of all, from WisdomTree's product perspective, we've made a ton of progress. I forget where we're exactly at. We've got a mobile app, WisdomTree Prime, all tokenized assets, tokenized funds. That might have been available in less than 20 states at the time. Today, we're in 41 states, available to 75% of the population. Full suite of products available in that with things like instant deposit and stuff like that. So we've made a ton of projects in terms of our own investments and advances in the space. And I think there's been a lot of progress in the industry. I mean, a lot of people talk about tokenization of real world assets. You're seeing some more people look at this saying like, oh, this is what a stable coin is, why you can do this and apply this to other assets as well. So we've seen a ton of adoption and just overall interest, I guess I'd say, in this. And not just in kind of, one thing I was talking about last year, it's like, outside of just like doing it at POCs, right? Proof of concepts, actually doing real life products like what WisdomTree's doing going forward. So it's been a lot of progress.
Yeah, you mentioned WisdomTree Prime, and that goes to my sort of question of where WisdomTree fits into the idea of expanding tokenization. If you see yourself as sort of a leader when it comes to that app or sort of showing the way beyond proof of concepts, where do you fit in towards the goal of tokenizing assets?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so WisdomTree was founded kind of on the premise that ETFs are a better technology than mutual funds. We see a similar trend playing out with tokenized assets where we think over time it'll prove out to be the better wrapper than kind of what exists today. So what ETFs did to mutual funds, we think tokenized assets are going to do to ETFs. So we view ourselves as being one of the first mover there. We've got a broad suite of both funds and also non-fund, non-security products as well that we're doing. And we're also doing this in terms of not just putting it out there and letting it sit there, but creating like real life use cases around it through what we're doing with WisdomTree Prime. Going to be doing more on the business to business side as well, making these tokenized assets and tokenized funds available to more people.
How do you feel about buy-in from Wall Street? We've heard negative comments from Jamie Dimon about crypto broadly, but even he was like, tokenization, there is something there. Do you feel like the big banks get it? Do you feel like Wall Street gets it? Or is there progress to be done in sort of educating Wall Street?
I think big banks definitely get it. Yeah. I think big banks want to be doing more in this space. I think, big banks are one thing, they have their own issues in terms of doing stuff, et cetera. There's no question there's demand there. Where I think some people have been getting their heads around is doing more and more stuff on terms of public blockchains versus private blockchains. 5 years ago, you look and there would be these giant private blockchain consortiums and things like that. That was never our play. We were always trying to not pick winners and losers here, focused on public blockchains, doing the permissioning at a different level there. I think that's really being borne out over time, and I feel like we were right with that thesis.
Yeah. One of the roadblocks to the sort of Wall Street adoption was the idea that there's a lot of regulatory red tape when it comes to getting them on board with crypto or with blockchain, and that sort of brings me to the conversation around regulation, which we've been having over the past week. We saw the passage of FIT 21 in the House. We saw Congress pass a repeal of SAB 121. How do you feel about where regulation is in the US as we're coming up on an election? You launched both Bitcoin and Ether ETFs in the UK. You got FCA approval, so I feel like you're the right person to ask for sort of a comparison of where the US is with the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, just by way of example, that product that just listed on the LSE, we launched our spot Bitcoin product there back in 2019 in Switzerland. And so there's just a different attitude and approach from the regulators in that market. Different market overall, lots of different countries compared to the US. So different market. It's interesting that the LSE, FCA, and then the LSE listed these just after there was approval for Bitcoin ETFs, even though the same product existed and listed on other exchanges over there. So look, I think sometimes it feels like it's been slow moving in terms of regulation and kind of friendliness towards the space, but we've been making progress and others have as well. It does seem like there's been more bipartisan momentum in terms of like embracing of the space recently, trying to keep innovation onshore. So hopefully that continues, and we'll see where it goes from here.
Final question. What brought you to Consensus? I mean, I feel like in the past, TradFi and DeFi and crypto have sort of been at odds, but clearly here, there's a lot of TradFi players that are here. What brought you here?
Yeah, Consensus is a Big Ten event. So there's some other events to go to. You're like, do I belong here? I mean, I belong everywhere, but like, no, I love being able to see people in person in this remote world, like a lot of people that you're trying to meet up with. Hard to do. You can see so many people in person at this meeting. It's great. Love doing conversations like this. So for us, Consensus has done a nice job being kind of the center of this. I think the city of Austin does a good job with it. So that's why I'm here.